All right. Thanks so much to everybody who is joining us right now, and welcome. I'm going to talk as perhaps attendees start to come into the event. Welcome to the first of hopefully a couple of collaborations in 2021 between the Goethe-Institut Washington and the Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung North America and Beyond Nuclear International. My name is Raleigh Joyner. I am from the Goethe-Institut in Washington, D.C., so I'm coming to you from Tacoma Park, Maryland. I just wanted to welcome everybody to our Zoom event where we talk about two really great documentary films. The film The Beekeeper, which is from the United Kingdom, directed by Will McGregor and featuring Katie Hayward, and the film 33 Days of Utopia, which is directed by Roswitha Ziegler, and that comes from Germany. And we thought that these were two very special films to sort of kick off our collaboration this year. We really wanted to do a couple of events that focused on resistance through the arts. And so as a result, we decided that this would be a really great way to start it off. We often show together as our sort of trio partnership. Every year we sort of try to show something as a film screening each year, especially around the time that we would observe the anniversary of the Chernobyl disaster. And also this year, we also are observing 10 years since Fukushima. And so we have several anniversaries that come around the springtime. And so we're really glad that we've been able to, even in virtual times, kick this off with some great films and some programming. So I just wanted to go over just a couple things about how this particular webinar works. We have our panelists from Germany and our panelists from the United Kingdom here, and we also have my two partners from Heinrich-Böll and from Beyond Nuclear. And so we are going to have a panel discussion, and as a result, I just wanted to let you know about the Q&A and chat functions. Some people I see already have the chat function on, or they're able to use it, and they're checking in. If you have anything that you'd like to say as a hello, or sometimes it's cool to see where people are coming in from. I see some people are from Thailand. I see somebody mentioned Saskatchewan in Canada. So yeah, if you want to drop in where you're coming from, that's always really cool to hear, especially since we're doing things from all over. And yeah, if you would like to ask any questions for our panelists as the discussion gets going, please drop that in the Q&A. We are going to have a period towards the end of the conversation after Linda runs through a couple of rounds of questioning, and you are welcome to put that in Q&A, and we'll go through them and try to get some cohesive questions to pull out and continue the conversation with the audience. So that is about everything that I have to say about the tech-wise elements of this program. And having said that, I would like to then hand it over to my colleague, Nora Löhle from the Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung. And so she can go ahead and do the next part of our introduction. Thank you.
Thanks, Raleigh. Thanks for hosting our virtual event. Very exciting to see you all, and very excited to see we have 43 participants here now in our room, just to give you an idea, from all over the world, it seems. My name is Nora. I'm Heinrich-Böll Foundation. We are the German Green Foundation. And so we have very close relationships with the German Green Party. And as the Green Party in Germany was founded out of the anti-nuclear movement, we have very strong and let's say, yeah, founding roots within the anti-nuclear movement. So this event and this dialogue we are going to listen to today is very important to us because, again, resistance against nuclear isn't over yet. It's not won yet. And I think the only point I want to get us started with is to remind ourselves that the resistance against nuclear is not only a call for saving the Earth and the planet, but also for calling for a peaceful world. And with that, I'm excited that Linda, our colleague, will be moderating this discussion today. And I hand it over to you, Linda.
Thank you, Nora. I'm Linda Pentz Gunter. I'm with Beyond Nuclear and also Beyond Nuclear International. which is our more sort of magazine-oriented website where you might have read about the event today, and where we like to feature a more internationally focused presentation. So I'm glad to see that there are many people joining us amazingly from all sorts of places across the world. So thank you all for being here. I'd like to briefly introduce and welcome each of our guests, and then we will move to the interview phase, followed by questions from the audience, as Raleigh said. So beginning, you should be able to see people's names captioned, but Roswitha Ziegler, who is the director of 33 Days of Utopia, she's on the left of your screen, sitting next to Rebecca Harms. And as she says in the film, this is her 7th Gorleben film and probably her last. She was, of course, present at the original 1980 Free Republic of Wendland encampment and co-founded the Wendland Film Cooperative, which produces documentaries and short films. Attila Dézsi is in some ways the inspiration for 33 Days of Utopia, with his unusual way of looking back at the 1980 protest by literally excavating it. Attila is a student at the University of Hamburg, currently working on his PhD about the archaeology of the contemporary past at sites of recent and ongoing protest. Rebecca Harms, who's next to Roswitha, to her left, our right, is a protagonist of 33 Days of Utopia. Her anti-nuclear activism began in the mid-1970s on through the Gorleben encampment, and has continued in her political career as a member of the European Parliament, representing the Green Party and the European Free Alliance, a position she held until 2019. She is also a producer with the Wendland Film Cooperative. Will McGregor is the director of the now multi-award-winning short documentary, The Beekeeper. He grew up on a farm in Norfolk, England, and has directed for both film and television. Interestingly, his debut feature film, Gwen, was a historical drama also about the struggle to hold on to a farm in Wales threatened by a ruthless company. Katie Hayward is the subject of The Beekeeper. Katie was one of the few holdouts refusing to abandon her farm to make way for a new nuclear power plant at the Wilver Bee site in North Wales. Katie is the owner of Felin Honeybees, and she also does bee therapy with people suffering from depression, PTSD, and other psychological trauma. So welcome to all of our guests. And now for an update for those who may not know the latest news. As 33 Days of Utopia tells us, the Gorleben high-level nuclear waste dump did not happen and will never happen there. And neither will the nuclear plant at Wilver Bee. Hitachi cancelled Wilver Bee and no other nuclear buyers stepped up. There are, of course, rumblings about bringing a small modular reactor there, but even if that happens, it's years away. So Katie is not leaving. Thank you again for being here today. Both these films, as you will have seen, are about resistance to a nuclear project. One portrays a woman's lone defiance and the other a communal act of solidarity. But I was struck by the fact that although nuclear power is the reason for this resistance in both films, we seem to be grappling more with something more fundamental about our values, our humanity, and how we should and can live in greater harmony with each other and our surroundings. So there's plenty to talk about. So to begin with you, Roswitha, after 6 films about Gorleben, why did you decide that this story was worth telling a 7th time, and how did you and Attila first meet?
I decided I always wanted to make a last film about Gorleben, and we covered nearly everything about it. And then I read in our local newspaper that Attila wants that there's an archaeologist to dig out the place where we have been demonstrating and building up huts and something like that 30 years ago. And I thought, that cannot be true. Maybe it's a joke, but it was true. So Attila wurde unsere Hauptfigur. became our main figure, der rote Faden, was heißt das?
Red line.
The red line through the film. And without Attila, there would be no 7th film about Gollum.
Well, it's a fascinating story, and I'm eager to ask Attila a little bit more about what fascinated him about that site. But I just want to go to Will next with really the same question, Will. How did you hear about Katie Hayward, and why did you think it would make a good film?
Well, we actually met in person. Katie came to a screening of my film, Gwen, which, as you mentioned, thematically is quite similar to The Beekeeper, even though it was fiction. So I made a folk story about, it's Maxine Peake, who some of you might know, who's sort of protecting her home in the Industrial Revolution. And Katie saw this, and I think it really spoke to her. Kind of, I guess, not uncanny because it's a timeless issue, but it definitely spoke to her. And I remember her asking a question through tears during the Q&A in front of the entire audience about her experience and sort of her views on the film. And we kind of got talking after that, really. And I mean, I guess naturally, Katie's story I felt was something that people should hear about, and it spoke to me and the kind of subject matter that I'm interested in, and wanted to help her tell her story, really. So just, you know, we emailed and had phone calls, and I went and spent time with her in Wales, and she very kindly put me up. And yeah, just started working with the footage that she'd been filming, and started filming myself. And it was a very sort of natural process, really. But it all came together off of meeting in a cinema in Bangor.
Oh, sort of serendipity, yeah. Well, Katie, first of all, congratulations. It's such good news that you can stay on your farm. Yay.
Thank you.
What we see in the film, though, are much darker times. And so what was the hardest part for you in this often lonely struggle? And how did you resist just not giving up to Horizon and letting them take the place?
There's so many reasons. If I didn't stand up to them, who would? And if not me, who? And they have to learn they can't just buy everybody, these big corporate companies, and they can't just roll over people, the little man, just because they're in their way. And I didn't have any other option but to fight, because my mum always taught me to stand up for myself against any bully. And there was times when it got really difficult. And I think meeting Will, I'm a true believer in fate, because he came along at the darkest time of the fight, because the fight lasted 7 years. And I felt quite isolated and alone. So the fact that somebody believed in me enough to put it on a screen and wasn't frightened, it was a lifesaver, to be honest. Yeah, it was a lifesaver.
That's a contrast in a way with what you went through, Rebecca, with the sort of mass encampment, that solidarity, the communal living. And yet there's a moment in the film where you also ask, you know, how can we win, because they're destroying absolutely everything. When you watch 40 years later, when those objects came up in Attila's dig, how did you feel about what you actually achieved? Did you feel like you did win in some way?
So when Attila decided to dig out our past, this was for all of us a huge surprise. I was very much in favor, because I hoped that with this process of digging out the past, another process could start in between us representing the younger generation from the very beginning of the anti-nuclear movement. So with our presence in this new process, we could restart the debate on nuclear in the context of the climate movement. That's still difficult, but in a way it works. So we will see. But the whole story of Gorleben is very, very difficult to tell in some minutes in this debate. When Attila came, we were already on the winning path. Yeah, so German's government, the Merkel government after Fukushima had decided to phase out nuclear. It was the second phasing out decision. And this was a decision based on a huge majority in the German parliament. I think without all the fights before, without also our engagement for the energy transition. So our fight was always against nuclear, but we understood very early, you cannot only phase out something, you must know what to phase in. And when Fukushima happened, it was so very much developed, the energy transition technologies, much more than after Chernobyl. And so the pressure caused by Fukushima, the possibilities with new technologies, solar, wind, efficiency, this really boosted then in Germany the phasing out of nuclear. Meanwhile, we are also beyond Gorleben, the final disposal. And I think our movement here in Gorleben is probably one of the most successful movements of Germany in the last decades.
I think it's very striking, actually. It's always been striking to me how in Germany, the anti-nuclear movement and the pro-renewable movement, and even the anti-nuclear weapons movement, have all kind of been married together. Whereas for us, certainly in the USA, they've mostly been separate, and that's actually hampered our chance.
Same here. It's same here. We are not that much united as it seems, but we are, I think, in this fight against nuclear power, we managed to unite very different parts of society.
Yeah.
It was not such a homogeneous situation as in other movements, especially also in the regions, in the countryside, like here around Gorleben. For example, the farmers were the most important actors. I think Germans in the very beginning were always very impressed when they saw the big trucks by the farmers blocking all the streets, not only us, the hippies, but also the farmers with their trucks. I think it was for the success, the later success, it was the most important contribution.
Yeah, and I think that was perhaps one of the most disappointing things. I'll circle back to you on this a bit later, Katie, about the farmers in Anglesey, where I think there was really only one farm that held out along with Katie against the Wilbur B site. Most of them sold out, which was a pity. But I want to move on to you, Attila, now, because obviously this must have been a rather different experience for you, because normally when you dig up ancient objects, you don't have the people who were there at the time to sort of tell you, you know, what they meant or what you're finding. So it's rather an unusual approach. Can you talk a little bit about why, as an archaeologist, you chose this to dig up this site, which was only 40 years old?
Yeah, I would love to, but how do I start? I think it's maybe not that unusual. I think in the last 2 or 3 decades, an archaeology of the contemporary past developed, and there are a lot of other folks doing excavations on rather recent sites. And the question is, why are we doing this? And I thought that this place in Gorleben is quite a special and an iconic one. And I wanted to understand what happened there and how people shaped the environment and the things they used and how that shaped their lives at the long term, right? And I think exactly when you have other people to talk about this stuff you're excavating, it's much more fascinating than maybe in earlier times, because you can actually reflect on the stuff and getting much more ideas to understand what happened there.
Yeah, some of the reflections I think that we see in the film are really fascinating in terms of what comes up, and I'll circle back to that as well towards the end of the conversation. But you know, in Anglesey, Will, there was obviously, you know, a lot of support for the nuclear plant, and a lot of intensity, let's say, coming from Horizon, which we should explain is the subsidiary of Hitachi. So Hitachi was the owner of the 2-reactor plant site company from Japan. Horizon was the UK-based subsidiary, and they, once they caught wind of the fact that you were making this film, Will, decided to bring their lawyers into the picture, as I understand it, and to oblige you to make some changes, including adding those disclaimers at the end, which might have surprised some of our viewers, but you know, might have put their antennae up that there was perhaps a reason why they were there. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, you know, the rather surprising pressure that you perhaps found yourself coming under when you were making the film, and also that, as you mentioned, it's not officially online yet. So whether, now that you've got a happy ending, which we don't see in the film, whether you've thought about re-editing the ending and changing that to update people on what actually happened now that Horizon's actually gone away.
Yeah, well, obviously I experienced a fraction of what Katie experienced in terms of pressure, and I think, you know, really what Katie went through is another level compared to what I went through in terms of making the film. But definitely I was naive to the fact that you could make a, you know, a film, it's not even about them, it's about Katie, but that paints a picture of them in an antagonistic light, and that they weren't gonna try and stop you. And then, you know, there's whole PR machines, you know, buying people out is obviously one way about it, but there are other ways about it. And you know, I'm not an experienced documentary filmmaker. I, as you mentioned, direct film and television. I'm part of a bigger production, and I very rarely even have to talk to the lawyers that represent us. And it came as a bit of a surprise when they saw the film, and I started to get communication from them, very much like trying to, I think, scare us from releasing the film. I very quickly turned to the production company that were helping me, hoping that their lawyers would give me some advice. Their advice was to remove any logo or any mention of this production company from the film. They actually got scared and wanted nothing to do with it. So their advice was basically, you're on your own, mate, which was not helpful. But I eventually did manage to find a really helpful lawyer from Reviewed and Cleared, who basically said his job was as much reassuring people that they're being bullied as it is, you know, defending them in court. So he worked pro bono to effectively reassure me. And there are legal documents that you require to sort of protect yourself in terms of the documentary being fact checked and certain things like that. And then you do have to, you know, ask for some kind of comment from people featured in the documentary. So we ended up with a version. I don't have to show them the latest version, and obviously they don't exist anymore. So we're now much safer, and I can kind of open things up again. And some of the quotes that they gave us to use at the end, which maybe I didn't have to use, but definitely felt very much like we should and had to, from the way we were being spoken to. So yeah, there was an element of us being bullied, and it did change the edit, even just to sort of protect ourselves as filmmakers. But now that they don't exist, and as Katie put it the other day when we were talking, there's a skip outside the Horizon offices, and they're filling it, hopefully recycling some of that office furniture they're getting rid of, putting it to good use elsewhere. But there definitely was a sort of an approach they took with us to try and stop us from releasing it. But yeah, I am looking forward to opening up the edit. And I think what we'll do is we will change the end cards and then maybe have a little reprisal. So that was the film we made. That's the story we told. There's probably a whole new film in what's happened, but I think it would be nice to almost maybe like during the credits have but you know, this has now changed and the situation has moved on. But yeah, I mean, I'm not as relieved as Katie is that they don't exist anymore, but I am also relieved for my own reasons.
Well, Katie, I mean, obviously it was, an understatement to say that this was a traumatic experience for you. And that comes across even in the 12 minutes of this wonderful film. There is a moment in the film where you say, you're out at the hives actually, and you break down and you say, I'm all right until I talk about this lot.
Yeah.
As you say also in the film, the bees are so important and yet dependent on us for their survival. So in this fight that you were in, even though the film's about you, did you feel like the survival of the bees in some way represented something even bigger than your own ability to keep the farm?
Yeah, all of this, through none of it, to be honest, I was fighting for me, because until Christmas I was actually being begged by my consultants to stop fighting because it was killing me. This was so much bigger than me. We railroad over nature and history and people's heritages so much in our culture that somebody's got to start kicking. I think we've become far too accepting of, well, this needs to happen for jobs, or this needs to happen for... If we keep sacrificing what's important to the world in general, where's it going to end? And my bees have saved my life so many times that they are. See, I'm smiling like an idiot. I light up when I'm around my bees, and I light up when I'm around nature. I've got a rescued poorly duck on my knee. I've got to apologise because I've had to snatch her quickly and bring her in. But
you can tilt your camera if you want.
She was getting bullied by the cockerel outside. Somebody had dumped her down in the nature reserve because she's disabled. She's got something called angel wing. So I've been nursing her in my bath and in the house for the last week. But this is Angel, we've called her. But everything about what I do is about caring for creatures and speaking up for things that can't speak for themselves. And that's what Will did for me. And I'll never be able to thank him enough for it. Especially, and it is frightening when a big corporate company are at you, and the propaganda machine is so powerful. I went to the press and they made statements that shut the press up. So the press backed off. It's a constant barrage of it, but you've just got to believe in what you're doing is right, even if no one else believes you. So,
well, I should point, in addition to a story about Katie's situation on the Beyond Nuclear International website, we also ran a piece about the Jones farm, and Katie's very familiar with them, who were the only was sort of a dairy farm, I guess, or they have cows, where they didn't give up their business. And it was, again, a situation, it had been in the family for 300 years, and they ended up being sort of surrounded by land that had all been sold by other farmers. They said they were sort of in the mouth of the tiger. There they were, the only ones, and they're still there. So that was a happy ending, obviously, for you and for that family. And Roswitha, in a way, you too got the happy ending, so no radioactive waste will be dumped at Gorleben. However, there's still no solution to the radioactive waste problem. And as you mentioned, Rebecca, it's going to, they're going to look at somewhere else. And I think, as you said in the film, they're going to reopen this in 2031, I think, and say, here, we found a new place. So I was wondering, Roswitha, how you feel about the fact that there's still no solution to radioactive waste. Are there still films to be made about that story? The perpetual search for what to do with the waste.
Yes, it's necessary to make more films about this subject.
So there will be work for generations of filmmakers around the issue of nuclear waste. I am, after 45 years working with Gorleben and other plans for disposal of nuclear waste, I'm kind of expert, and I decided after retiring from the European Parliament to return to this issue as one of my main topics. And I'm right now involved in this new process, searching a place which is suitable for the idea of deep geological disposal of high-level waste in Germany. We have completely restarted the process. We have in Germany new institutions responsible. We have now more participation. There has been the state founded and pays for a chamber of citizens and other stakeholders, representatives. There are public debates in each step of this search. Right now, we are in the first phase of public debates, and everything is really well done. I think never before Germany has seen such an open process to find a solution for this very, very special and terrible problem. Seeing how perfectly it's done right now, I have again and again severe doubts whether in the end, if after many, many comparisons and many, many rounds of discussions about different geologies, whether in the end citizens will accept to have such a disposal in their region. I think it's one of the most difficult tasks, the nuclear states, the others not, but those 32 states around the world with nuclear power and nuclear weapons, they face a very special challenge, and that we have no solution after 50 years of research is really terrible.
And yet in most of those other countries, we continue to make more waste, which is of course
many
problem. So, and it seems to me also that, you know, this idea of finding a repository where you're going to find the right geology, a stable political environment, no sort of environmental justice issues, you know, all the confluence of things that have to make one perfect place seem almost an impossible task.
But it's, I can only recommend to those people from other countries listening now to try to understand what's going on in Germany right now on this issue, because it's really impressive, but in the same time, it's also depressing, because there's that much investment of money and brain and work necessary to overcome the legacy of this nuclear power period in Germany, which lasted only some decades. Yeah, but now there's probably 70, 80, 100 years ahead of us before we have a solution.
And here in the US, they're talking about licensing reactors for 100 years, which is the latest battle that we're in.
It will not work, yeah. I'm sure.
Wrap up this phase of the interview now with Attila, because I want to just ask you a little bit more about, you know, when you were digging up, it seemed like you dug up mostly sort of banal objects, you know, very sort of ordinary thing, what we would consider sort of ordinary things of everyday life, but you met the find with great enthusiasm, I think, and it seemed. And so I was curious to see, you know, what these objects meant to you and what you learned as a result of this experience of digging up the Gorleben site.
It was quite fascinating that Roswitha only visited us on a site on one trench. We had 5 trenches open in total, and one trench was actually a hut in the center of the village. But the stuff that is on the documentary is a trash pit, a dump site from I think the police forces. Very, very monotone stuff like rations for food and single packaged lemonade cans and very strange stuff. That was quite shocking in the first moment, but after we could contextualize them with gas mask filter and part of police equipment also dumped into the site, it's quite clear that must be from the other side, from the police forces. But this unit, the trench of in the center of the village was a pit house. Yeah, that's the right name. It's quite 3 to 3 meter and 2 meter deep thing with still the furniture in place, and it was concealed by the bulldozers who just put a lot of debris on top of it. And seeing that was quite moving, especially when people were there who lived in the village, and see that was quite touching moment. But I think it was quite fascinating to see that I expected a lot of material culture of protest, like barricades or lock-ons or stuff that you would expect on a place of resistance, like where you can clearly see this is a site of resistance. But strangely, I found, as you mentioned, everyday objects. Like it was a place for living, and it was a place for playing cards and having a good time, and alcohol bottles, and recreating this place into a site that is haven't been there before, and have been turned into something quite fascinating. And so in the middle of nowhere, 1 hour drive, you have to get there, and you find this big infrastructure of hundreds of buildings. And I think that's quite striking that there was no need for material culture of resistance. It was maybe this positive thing that was explored there, that is maybe one thing that's quite fascinating from the German anti-nuclear movement is this idea not to protest against something, but also protest for something, to turn it around and explore alternatives. And I think that's visible in the excavation, but I didn't had a look at that in the first round of my interpretations.
I was actually always hoping that you'd find the boat. I felt like there was something so symbolic about that swinging boat in the sky, you know, that spoke to the hope of this utopia, this different way of life, that freedom. And so when you got to that last dig and everyone was so excited, I thought, oh, they found the boat, you know. But maybe you still will. So, well, thank you all for this phase of the discussion. I'm going to hand back over now to Raleigh Joyner from Goethe, who has hopefully been having a look at the questions in the Q&A. And I would encourage, you know, all of you watching, do put your questions in the Q&A. If you're putting them in the chat, we might still see them, but if you put them in the Q&A, we will definitely see them. And we will, we've got plenty of time, so we should be able to answer them all. But if for any reason we don't get to all of your questions, we will see who they're from, and we can follow up with you online later to answer them if need be. But thanks again, and I'll hand over to you, Raleigh.
Thank you, Linda, and thanks to all of our panelists. It's been really interesting to be behind the screen listening to you all. And thank you to everybody who's joining us. And I see that in the chat and in the Q&A, you all have been sharing some thoughts, which has been really interesting to read. Please feel free to continue sharing Q&A and thoughts with us as I sort of pick through and try to put some questions together and pull out some themes. One question that I was able to sort of pull out that started to emerge pretty much, Linda, I think probably as soon as you mentioned that the updates that Katie is not going to leave her farm, and that if anybody was not sure about what happened with Gorleben, there was never a waste treatment plant being waste processing plant, sorry, built there. And so we have Kevin and Marilyn, and they both sort of in the Q&A, and also Marilyn sent a question in advance. An interesting question that I think speaks to this topic of, well, one, propaganda, which, because Marilyn asks, why in the world does Britain believe that nuclear plants are net zero and green energy? This is baffling and completely erroneous. The cost alone is unsustainable, but imagine the carbon footprint of draining the ocean, as Katie described, and blasting. Not to mention there's already an ugly, decommissioned, obsolete plant standing right there. The waste makes nuclear power generation totally unsustainable. What is going on in Great Britain? And then also we have from Kevin, he mentions the Dungeness Nuclear Power Station B. And he mentions that we are told there are no safety issues and it will be business as usual. And from both of them, you sort of see this pointing out that the propaganda that surrounds nuclear power and its sustainability, oftentimes, as you see, people are able to sit right there and discredit these comments on the spot. So I was wondering if anybody wanted to really respond to that idea of how they came across. Katie, maybe that's something that, especially Katie and Will, it might be something that you all definitely came across in your experiences, is this idea of propaganda and basically being told what to think.
Constantly, absolutely constantly. Well, most recently, when the planning permission was pulled and the development consent order withdrawn, and it was official, there was no Wilver B. I actually got hate mail through the post. I got anonymous hate mail with newspaper articles, like they were blaming me. So it's easy to focus on me because I stood up and I was counted as my voice mattered. And as part of a community, I would support someone who did that. But the corporate company that were actually doing this to our community have been defended because of the big propaganda machine. They're great. They've built us a football pitch. They're fantastic. They sponsored this. They're fantastic. These corporate machines have so many departments. They have psychologists. And I used to work for a corporate company that built Tesco's, and they have retail psychologists that show how people shop. And there are people in the nuclear industry that are programmed and are trained to think like we do. There's a reason propaganda is so powerful. And it's the unfortunate thing is it actually worked on my island.
I think that's what you never think about with propaganda. It's not just about the message you see in the press or in the media. It's about these, as you quite rightly put, the psychology, how if you win over people where I guess, you know, there isn't always much work on Anglesey and what industry is there, so people are going to want jobs, but then what's promised isn't necessarily what's going to be delivered. And then, yeah, as you say, you build a sports facility and you promote and you advertise and you sponsor events and their names everywhere. It's multifaceted, the approach they take. And, you know, the legal arm that we'd have dealt with would have been dealing with us in a specific way, knowing that they can manipulate or try and push certain things. And the things we took out of the documentary, Katie, like there was a lot more about your illness, but that was actually hard to keep in because from a documentary standpoint, it was hard for us to prove categorically, so we can't put it in. But so even as a sort of trying to make a film, you're often finding that you're slightly hamstrung to tell your own point of view anyway, because of this need for like a balanced perspective or like having to fact check everything. That actually can sort of hinder the story you're trying to tell. So yeah, I think there's even more that you went through that we couldn't even put in the film.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I am so grateful, and look at the amazing job you did, even though your hands were tied. Yeah, you're winning awards all over the world. Well, so you know, it's you've not done bad, lad. That's all I'm saying.
I think the exciting thing is we can continue to you know, work on the film as well. So in a way, our hands have slightly become untied because of the fact that it won't go ahead. Means that maybe we can be a little bit stronger with our ending.
Yeah,
It was nice.
it's
It's a relief for me. It must be a relief for you.
oh, the work hasn't stopped since. It's only been 5 weeks of bliss, and the work's not stopped. We're building bee-friendly raised beds. I actually dug up all of my fruit trees thinking I can't leave them to be demolished. They can't bulldoze them. So I dug them up and put them in pots, and they've lived in pots for 4 years. And over the last week, I've replanted them. We're building a new bee workshop. We're looking at getting the mill done. It's like the farm is breathing again, probably because I am as well. It's just, yeah, it's brought life back, but it's just such a shame that there is no community left to share that with, or everyone else has been demolished, unfortunately. So, it's a bright sunny day here on Anglesey, and has been for 5 weeks. So yeah, it's propaganda and pressure with propaganda is a big issue, to be honest. But you've just got to believe in what you are and what you do. The amount of people that thought I was in this for the money, and they thought I was in it to get a payoff. Social media, I don't read posts, but my mum does, and she gets upset. And it's like, oh, every tear is worth 500 grand. They were actually, evacuating me from my farm for the price of a van. So there was no big money involved at all. But it's one way of shutting the community up if they say that I'm being paid off. For the amount of £3,000, I would have had nowhere to go. But when they tell you that they're paying me, the rest of the community go, she's after more money. But the propaganda, all of it is all in there. But you stuck with me, Will, and Linda's been an amazing support as well. So thank you to everybody.
So I find it an amazing idea to continue with the second phase of this documentary. So about this propaganda and the pressure by the big company and what this meant. Because this is a part of the problems, especially around nuclear industry. Nuclear industry lives very much from fake news. So also this whole new debate on nuclear is mainly based on wrong and misleading information. So we'll do this second document.
Yeah, we definitely need to carry it on.
And it is interesting that, because going through the comments and the chat, several people, of course, have commented on how inspiring these stories are, how emotionally touched and moved they were by watching these two documentaries. And also I noticed, it was quite interesting to see sort of a theme of universality. Some people who have also stood up to nuclear at other points in history at different places in the world have commented. Here we have somebody who was talking about their time in Oklahoma, stopping the Black Fox nuclear plant through citizen resistance. And we are in contact this is from Maryland. And we are in contact with each other to this day. So much I am hearing rings so familiar to our resistance experience. We have Cynthia, who mentioned in Berkeley, California, that they are currently working to shut down the dangerous Diablo Canyon nuclear plant, which is California's last nuke. And also Scott, who is saying hello from 3 Mile Island Alert, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. We are worried that many shortcuts will be taken on cleaning up the 2 reactors. And so we have several people in here who live in places where either currently they are fighting some kind of a nuclear project, or they in the past recall this. And of course, I can see in the responses that they see a lot of these stories in their own experiences. And I thought, Attila and also Roswitha and Rebecca, I thought about, especially with 33 Days of Utopia, you sort of see this element, especially Attila, I think the way that you brought archaeology into this, where you dig up these sort of everyday objects and you have the people who are at Gorleben with you as you're going through these things. This idea of something that's tying everybody together who decides that they're going to stand up to something like this, whether it, well, I guess the question would be, what do you think it is that sort of ties people together, that the people in the comments who can say that they see a lot of these stories in themselves, or you know, the commonalities between the two stories that we're talking about here? What is it maybe that about this particular topic that brings people together so strongly? I mean, I think I know, but I'd still be interested in hearing what you think.
It's a good question. I think that I can't speak for the people who live there. They better talk for themselves. But I guess it could be the common experience of agency, that you can change stuff when you get together, and maybe the whole way of seeing that alternatives are possible. I don't know. When I looked at the material culture and the things actually in place at the camp, you see kind of networks and flowing streams of material that kind of represent the whole idea what happened there, because the camp itself couldn't last more than some days, because people needed food and building material and water and all that stuff that was kind of coming from outside, from farmers, from locals, and from the region, who all supported this thing. And the kind of the fringe between protesters and people living there and people visiting all dissolved and came to a new thing. And maybe it's these connections and these lines of solidarity that once experienced will be dragged into the future.
Solidarity is definitely the key. It's really amazing that when you actually fight something like this, you really learn who your network is and who your friends are, and who what their values are. And I've had friends that have been amazing. Two of my friends were actually for a week solid on suicide watch that I didn't realize. They were checking in on me at silly o'clock in the morning when I wasn't sleeping, and they were and then I've had friends that just couldn't deal with it. So obviously I've not spoke to them for a while. I've had a friend, when it was all pulled, say, oh well, stop thinking about the life you could have had now. Maybe you should move on. And I'm thinking, could have had? Did they think I was in it for the money? And solidarity in a community is key. It's whether these monsters can move in and do what they do, or whether they fail. And I hope going forward more people use their voices, because we have a voice. You should use a voice. I'm going to shut up now.
Funny, calling them monsters reminded me of another thing of so this freedom of speech, and I guess what's there to protect us to have freedom of speech, things like defamate, like not being able to call someone a monster, and not being able to just make a video and call out someone and say something like that about them, even though, you know, it's not like swearing, you know what I mean? It's like, we actually had Katie saying they're just monsters. It was actually the end of the trailer, and I had to take it down. And that's actually what started the issue, was because they could get us on defamation because we called them monsters, and you can't call someone monsters, even if you're showing them. You can present what they're doing, and the audience can make up that decision for themselves. So it's strange how actually these freedom of speech sort of that we're supposed to have, and the laws that are there to give everyone the chance to speak, actually can get used against you.
Yeah, And that was actually a video diary. It was, yeah.
I'm amazed by this. I never expected this to hear from your country. So how far this possibilities to interfere are going. And so again, make the second movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I add something to what Attila said about this community during the 33 days of Utopia in Gorleben? So these people did not know each other. So many of them met each other for the first time when they already decided to join this project of building up a village on a place which we occupied against the nuclear industry company there. And only a core group of this project came from the region. So we were organizing the infrastructure and the material, but most of the people who joined came from other places in Germany to support us. And it was a big experiment. So we had several ideas. We wanted really to stop the deep drilling to investigate the geology, the salt dome of Gorleben. We occupied a place where this deep drilling should start. We occupied it before it started. We wanted to do a non-violent action as long as possible with this village and with this occupation of the place to demonstrate to Germany that we are nice people, friendly, non-violent. We had lots of debates because also in that period in the anti-nuclear movement, you had different factions. So the non-violent faction, maybe there is kind of violence necessary, the black bloc in the beginning. And it all happened in the period when Germany was still suffering from real terrorism. And we were labeled as terrorists. So it was quite a tension for us, and that the solidarity in the end hold. That was possible, I think, because many people who joined this action really loved this place and loved this alternative life. So this 33 days were also a period of figuring out how another life with less consumption and less pressure and so less career thinking could look like. And these ideas were, I think, behind this level of the anti-nuclear fight. These ideas were kind of basic ideas for this period of social movements in Germany then. But it was a miracle. From my point of view, thinking back, I found it that we really managed, and that it lasted for 33 days was a miracle. Really? Yeah.
Somebody in the film who says she was on the spokes, and she said that they had like 33 days of tension, I think she called it. Or
it's my friend Gabi, one of my close friends, and it's true. Partly I enjoyed, but we had to discuss nights and days and nights about the rules for this moment, which we had to fear from the first day on, the moment when the police would arrive to stop the Republik Freies Wendland, and to develop our rules and to make them respected, and to find always also agreement with the locals and the farmers who supported us, was full of tensions for 33 days, yes.
And I was going to say that in the comments, we have a couple of, well, I sort of pulled two questions from the discussion that's going on right now in the comments in the Q&A. One of them is about this conversation of disposing of nuclear waste, because of course we have, well, three countries in this conversation. We have, Germany and the United States and the United Kingdom, and we're all sort of at different stages in the fight against nuclear. And I guess you could say that Germany is sort of phasing out nuclear and is more setting its sights on how it's going to get rid of the waste, as you all have mentioned. The United Kingdom still has several, I believe, nuclear power stations throughout, plants throughout the country. And of course, in the United States, we also have quite a few. I know that, well, where I grew up, there's one, Calvert Cliffs has a giant nuclear power plant not far from where I was a kid. And so we do have this question, not only of just phasing out nuclear, but also of disposing of nuclear and how to completely dismantle these decommissioned plants. And Mary Jane in the Q&A actually mentioned that it would be great to see everybody in our panel sort of work together to present a documentary in which maybe we could see how Germany can teach the countries that are interested in phasing out nuclear how to properly dispose of nuclear waste. And so the question that I sort of come up with in that sense is, where is Germany right now in figuring out how it can dispose of nuclear waste, and what can Germany potentially learn from, or what does Germany potentially have to teach countries like the UK and the US that are not as quite far along when it comes to this topic?
Well, it's a big and not easy to answer question. I think Germany learned already from other countries, especially from Sweden and from Switzerland. In those countries, the original plans for deep geological disposals were also once cancelled, and they restarted the search and development process. And I think meanwhile, Germany is doing the process even better than Switzerland and Sweden, especially also, I think, more transparent and more participative. But this challenge is, as I said before, is unique challenge. And the worldwide, in those countries where you have nuclear power or nuclear weapons programs or both, you need to find a solution for the nuclear waste. Until today, still the consensus in the nuclear industry and also among scientists, even among nuclear skeptical scientists, is deep geological disposal is the better solution among some options. But truth is, you either guard it, or you dump it deep underground. And then there is a variety of how to do it, but there are no more options. And dumping it deep, very deep, so 800, 900 meter underground, feels the safest option. Even for me, I'm convinced it would be the better way. But to prove it in a way that people are convinced they can agree to the risks related still to this, we are far away from this. And so in Germany right now, we are regarding, based on a new report, all geologies the country has. So we are regarding salt, clay, and granite rock. In other countries, you have not the same options. So there are the three options possible in Germany, but now you feel, after the first report about the three different possibilities regarding geologies, it will be quite a problem to convince people that clay is better than salt, or salt would be better than clay, because now you have places with salt, possible places for a dump, for the deep geological disposal, and you have places with clay. And so if you decide for salt, the people at these places will say, but why don't you take clay? Can you prove really that salt is better than clay? So it's a very, very complicated process ahead, and it will, and this makes it always more complicated, it will last for at least 2 generations, from the first steps in this process to the final decision that you open a nuclear disposal at a place.
Well, I would say that the first lesson that Germany has to teach us about the nuclear waste solution is to phase out nuclear power.
Yeah. It's key.
That's the key. And,
yeah.
and you know, and this is a longer discussion that we probably shouldn't have here, but I know that you were part of this nuclear waste, the World Nuclear Waste Report, which actually I moderated a discussion about fairly recently, and it's a very lively debate. And just so that, yes,
recommend it to everybody.
Yeah. Just to be clear, from the Beyond Nuclear position is something called hardened on-site storage, which is to keep the waste at the reactor sites, harden it, and because there is clearly no at the moment discoverable repository site that would work geologically and sociologically in the US. But I would actually, if you don't mind, Raleigh, I want to just go back to Katie and Will briefly, and I know we've got to wrap up soon, about this sort of hearts and minds issue. You know, that the whole thing about you know, on Anglesey, or Innsmouth as it's also known, and I should say that I learned from my Welsh friends that we should not refer to this as the United Kingdom, but talk about Wales as a country. So on Wales, you know, it's sort of symptomatic of this sort of voting against your own best self-interest, you know, believing the lie about the jobs and then agreeing to see everything that you believe in destroyed: landscape, culture, language, you know, what the essence of what Wales is really about. What do you both feel in you were there, I think 6 weeks while you were making this film, and you obviously lived there, Katie. What did you feel went kind of wrong that allowed so many people to sell up and allow their homes to be bulldozed, who are now presumably feeling betrayed or angry that, you know, this was all for naught, albeit something may come down the road, but it's not going to be anytime soon. So did you get a sense of why you were so alone? You know, you didn't have that big community. 800 people did not come from all over the country and support this fight. So I'm curious to know why you each think it kind of went that direction for you.
To be honest, I think if I hadn't have lived the way I have, and I've not always, you know, been on this farm, and a honeybee farm, I've traveled the world being a project manager, and I've seen how corporate companies work, and I've seen the machine. And if 4 men in suits would have walked through my door if I'd always been here and said, you have no choice, you have to sell, and the fear that they instill that they've got no choice, and everyone has a choice. Everybody, you have a choice to fight, or you have a choice to sell, or you have a choice to lead. It's a choice. But I feel no malice, no hatred, no anger towards anybody that did, because I was there to see it, and they were made to feel like they had no choice. And you know, fighting isn't for everybody, you know, it's all a personal choice, and I chose to fight them. Whether they hold malice against me because I caused so much trouble while I was fighting them, that is their choice. But I don't hold it against them. The heartbreaking thing for me is that my own local authority allowed the construction company to demolish all the houses before there was even a DCO in place. And it was all because of revenue, which is wrong. It's not the community that's at fault here. It's corporate and it's government, because they're the ones that drive projects like this, and they're the ones that put it out there in the press that it's so amazing for the island. And I don't blame the man next door. I blame the man that walked through his door to say that he didn't have a choice. At the end, we're just stewards on this planet. It's not ours. And I think as a society, we've all got to stop being so selfish. And we need to be honest, because the way we're treating our planet, we haven't got long left. But some people care more about their Starbucks or a walk through a park than they do about a woman on a farm being bullied, just trying to stick up for herself against a big, massive nuclear power development.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no,
yeah,
they care more about somewhere to take their dogs for a poo than they do about protecting something so precious as my home. But I still hold no malice, even though at times when I see some posts, I just want to shake people. But no, hand breathed. I'm going to go and talk to the bees in a minute. Anything to add there, Will? Seeing I've just
put it any better than you, really. But I think I certainly feel underqualified to be speaking on a panel about nuclear power. One of the reasons for that is I think it really is like, I realize that's what we're here to talk about, but it is a part of a wider issue in terms of, especially for Katie's story and why I wanted to tell Katie's story, it is this idea of stewardship and that, you know, look after what you have. And I think the problem is that with that is that our lives are the stories we tell ourselves, and whether it's nuclear power or Brexit, and there's so many issues we've got at the moment that I think, yeah, there's so many disillusioned people, and I think it is easy to manipulate people, and we're all being manipulated all the time, and it's sort of fighting back against that. I mean, I definitely don't have an answer. I think storytelling and telling stories can help, but I think, yeah, well, there's a lot of work, and I don't think it's just a hard thing to fight against, for sure. Fortunately, there are people like Katie standing up and doing the fighting, so yeah.
And I wanted to basically, well, first of all, thank you to everybody on the panel so much for your wonderful conversation and questions. You guys have said a lot of really interesting stuff, and same to everybody who is attending and putting their comments, questions into the chat and the Q&A. Thank you for everybody who has done that. And sorry if we could not get around to your point or question. We did have a lot, which is always great to see, and really appreciate everything that you all do to support our programming. I just wanted to jump off of what Katie had said about, and what Will had said about stewardship, because I thought that might be a nice question to sort of end at least my pulling from the audience questions with, because both Rosemary and Margaret in this conversation in the Q&A pointed out the topic of the younger generation. And it was interesting because in preparing for this event, I remember, Katie, when we did our test run, you mentioned that decommissioned plant that you have still on the island. And you said that there was some plan that by like 2150, it would be phased out, or it would be, they would have a plan by 2150 to have it dismantled. And, you know, Roswitha, you mentioned that this is your 7th and final film that you want to make about Gorleben, but still you and Rebecca, you have mentioned that there's still much more to be told. Attila, you have mentioned that, you know, you documented the material culture of this protest camp, and I think that in years to come, it's probably going to become even more interesting as people look back on that and realize what it was like to live in a protest camp, a little you know, commune like that in the 80s, protesting against this project. And all of this sort of speaks to something that I find very interesting about the anti-nuclear movement, which is that we're talking not even really a question of a couple of years, of a couple decades, but hundreds of years. I mean, as people have mentioned in the comments, you know, the idea of disposing of nuclear waste is I mean, disposal is the only word we can think of, but, you know, like Rebecca, like you described, putting it far underground is the best thing we can do. These are things that will take hundreds and thousands of years to undo what we have already done in situations, not just like Chernobyl and Fukushima, but, you know, just, yeah, in generating nuclear waste at all. And I think one thing that brings all of you all together is, and a lot of the people who are in the conversation, is that you are aware that this is a stewardship question. It's not about you and your lifetime. It's something that's going to go way beyond your life, the span of your life, and probably several generations' lives. And so Rosemary asked the question, how do you feel young people can be informed about the true hazards of nuclear developments? Nuclear is still being sold to Anglesey children as a passport to their future prosperity. I have heard no loud protests anywhere about the UK government increasing their nuclear arsenal. There seems to be no place in the school curriculum for the very real dangers and problems. Are we being silenced by government bodies? And then Margaret also asked the question, what are your thoughts on the younger generation's contributions to the fight against nuclear energy, and what would you like or hope to see? And I thought that was a nice sort of question, because everybody here shares that idea of, it's not about me in my lifetime, it's something that's going to go on for much, much longer than this. And what do you all think? I guess this could be really anybody's question that they could take, but what do you all think about that idea of, yeah, it's not all about you, it's about a bigger narrative, and it's about the planet and the longer scheme of things that we need to worry about in this conversation?
I think it all comes down to telling your story to whoever, where anybody that will listen. I didn't realize that my story was a story, because literally I was just fighting because I didn't have a choice. But, you know, for the last year, I've been out as an inspirational speaker, talking to people and not being ashamed, and using your voice and telling people that all this isn't scary. You just have to use your voice. And if you don't use your voice, the community is silent. And not everybody is comfortable putting their head above the parapet. But at the end of the day, the more people do, the more chance we've got. If I didn't have a team around me like Will, like Ben, like Cheryl and Anne, all behind supporting me, it makes me think whether I would have had the courage to carry on. But we need to inspire our kids to be inspirational, because you only get one life. So we just need to crack on and live it the best way, and leave this place a better place than what we found it.
I also wonder sometimes if you make films like ours, are we preaching to the choir, and maybe we break out a little bit and we find an audience that is brought to the story and understands the cause. But, you know, is there a form of storytelling, you know, a Netflix series that might be a young adult series that takes on this subject matter and breaks out in the way that the Chernobyl HBO show did? So it isn't necessarily a documentary where a younger audience is going to feel like they're being taught something. It's like a story they come to for entertainment. And, you know, Netflix is working on one now. That's good to know. Why am I directing that? So yeah, I think that kind of story is like, I think what will engage the younger generation.
Mm.
So I thought Roswitha wanted to answer, but I think because you mentioned it, the HBO serial on Chernobyl was quite important. And it's also well done. So I visited Chernobyl already in 1988, 2 years after the catastrophe happened, and I follow the issue since. And so this serial, based on the novel of Ukrainian Belarusian writer Svetlana Alexeyevich, is the best I have ever seen as fiction on such an issue like Chernobyl, I think, or among the best. And what I also observed, especially in Ukraine and in Belarus, is that the young people of today, so 35 years after the catastrophe, many young people have never really experienced what this was, that they get a clue about what happened then, even not by a documentary, but by fiction. And this really helped in Ukraine a new debate about Chernobyl and about nuclear as such and what it means for the country. I think there are also possibilities for documentaries to speak to the people. It depends. It's not every documentary is so successful, but we have, for example, a friend, Alain Hallieux. He made also 15 years ago a quite impressive documentary about the exclusion zone. And this now so after HBO serial, this film by Alain de Hallieux is back in the debate in Ukraine. And it's both, so fiction and documentaries can be also like weapons against the fake news of the nuclear industry.
So we should make a proposal for Netflix series about repositories all over the world.
It's interesting. Yeah.
Could be interesting. Don't you agree?
Especially with about all those places where the plan to build a deep geological disposal had to be given up because they are already given up places. So
there's an interesting documentary made by a Swiss director, Edgar Hagen, which I'm sure you're familiar with, called The Search for the Safest Place on Earth, in which he goes with a crazy Scotsman who is determined that there is such one. And they go to every single one and interview the people who are trying to make it work. And out of their mouths, you really, the projects are damned in a way, because it's clear that none of these places actually fit the bill, but each one is at first met with great enthusiasm. I mean, the only one that seemed to have gotten the public support was the one in Sweden. It was sort of, this moral responsibility thing kicked in, but I think you're right. There's plenty more great films to be made. So we hope that we'll see lots more work from you, Roswitha, and you will. I know that won't be on nuclear power, but I think that you're right in the sense that, you can tell the story in so many different ways. And that, as I said at the beginning, neither of these films really talked about nuclear, hardly at all, throughout the film. It was just the premise for whatever happened next, but it brought home something more important, which was about the values we all share about how we should live and how we should steward the earth, and how we could live in the terms of what you were trying to do at Gorleben, establish a different way of living together. And Katie, with you and all your, you haven't talked about all your many rescue animals. We've seen the duck and we've heard about the bees, but Katie has quite the menagerie out there, and all rescued from various places. And I think, both these films to me talked about what we should hold dear and what we should fight for, whether it's about nuclear power or fracking or, a chemical company or anything, any kind of predator, any corporate predator will inevitably harm. So, but I'm going to let you wrap things up, Raleigh, I guess, because we're reaching close to the end of our time, although we still have a great audience there. But
yeah, thanks so much for everybody to hang in, and whenever that happens, it makes us happy because it shows that people are enjoying the conversation, which is really good to hear, especially when I know that now we've got probably not long before the word like Zoom fatigue enters Merriam-Webster, because but anyway, I mean, after a whole year of being pretty much a whole year of doing virtual events, it always is you never get used to having a nice Zoom webinar. It still feels very fresh to finish a Zoom webinar that goes really well. So it feels just as great to have this go as well as it did, a year ago, to have whatever we did for the first time go very well. And so thanks so much to the team from the Beekeeper for joining us, Katie and Will. And thank you so much to the team from 33 Days of Utopia, Roswitha, Rebecca, and Attila. It's been really great to talk with you all. And thank you so much for everybody who has joined us in the audience to watch these films. And also, so you know, you can continue to watch the films until April 6th. So if you have not watched them, or if you would like to pass them on to somebody else to watch them, they will be up until the 6th of April. Another thing is, of course, to thank my partners in this project, Nora Löhle from the Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung here in DC, and also Linda Pentz Gunter. Thank you so much from Beyond Nuclear. Thank you so much for working with us together as we do every year on this project. And Linda, thanks so much also for moderating. It was great. And yeah, I think that's all I got from my corner. If anybody else wants to say anything, feel free.
No, thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, we want to thank you for inviting us and our film.
Yes. It was a pleasure to meet the Beekeeper and Will.
In the bee suit. I'm actually going to go out and feed some more in a bit before we lose daylight. No rest for the wicked, yeah.
And we'll look forward to your next project. And
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
good luck with the PhD. Yeah, it sounds like a fascinating topic. Keep us in touch with what you're doing. Thank you all very much.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good afternoon.